Yeah, and then I have executive produced in the past as well. You know, as a really it's a situation of going and putting equity together for productions, and that's something big that I do as well for my own productions, to raise money for them. So yeah.
Yeah, that I think that's the part of the process that most filmmakers find most frustrating, um, and most hard to grasp, I suppose. Um, at least in part because, at least in my experience, there's not really a single playbook for it. It's more of a set of tools and figuring out how to use each one and when to use each one. But before we get a little bit more into that, a lot of people don't really understand the difference between a producer and an executive producer. Specifically that, at least in my experience and how I use the term, executive producer is a lower title than producer. Is that how you found it as well? Or
I think that in terms of, I mean, there's definitely a difference between film and TV. You know, in
Mhm,
TV, executive producers are, yes, that's the top of the food chain.
mhm,
In terms of the films and, you know, feature films, it is going to be the producers that are at that top level. But I don't know if it's really a difference between. It's just hard because you have to lump a lot of executive producers together, whether they help bring financing to a film, because you
mhm,
really can't. You know, it's illegal for you to have you know, finders on your production. So
mhm,
you executive producer credits, or the actual financiers.
mhm,
So it's hard to really differentiate between those, you know, and that's something that you'll see a lot of independent films have a lot of executive producers because it took a lot of people to put those productions together, and a lot
mhm.
of different money pots going to and from. So that is very difficult to differentiate between. But I wouldn't say that the EP and the producers are, you know, I think they're pretty equal. I think it's just a matter of like they're just different. I feel like as a producer, you know, you're much more hands-on with the creative process as well. There definitely are a lot of financiers that I've worked with that are very into the creative and they want to talk about script and they want to give notes. And I totally am open. I open the door to that because I love that collaboration and that you know, experience with them. But you know, producers have to do pretty much everything for a
Mhm.
production in terms of like the development all the way through to post and overseeing distribution and, you know, signing up for cameras that people don't really, you know, normally don't do. And so it's a whole process, and I think that an executive producer is someone who can be kind of like pretty removed if they want to be. They can be as part of a bigger part of the production if they want to, but they're usually more removed. You know, they'll come to
Mhm.
set for a few days, but a producer's there handling everything from day one. So
Yeah, no, I completely agree. That's more what I was getting at when I said the uh producer title is somewhat low. Sorry, the executive producer title is somewhat lower, just more less involved.
yeah,
Um, an
it's
analogy I've
less
drawn,
involved.
yeah, an analogy I've drawn in the past is the executive producers are functionally the board, and the lead producer, the first listed generally, is loosely the CEO of the project. And but that is at least how the parlance I use. There's more variance in this than you'd expect on a lot of things. Um, but the but yeah, so you started as an AD. How did you end up fundraising?
Yeah, well, I started as a PA and worked my way up to AD, and I think that's something also that a lot of
Mhm,
people in the executive positions at studios they don't really do that. They don't start as a PA.
mhm,
I think it's a great experience because you can really understand what a crew actually does and what they go through to make movies, and you can appreciate it more. But in terms of the fundraising thing, it was kind of just one of those situations where I was, as a producer, it's kind of like you're pushed into going to go raise money for your movies. You know, no one's going to come into you and say like, I'm going to help you with this. I mean, it maybe that happens to some people, but it never happened to me. So it's kind of like, if I want to get these movies made, I'm going to have to learn how to go out and raise equity and talk to investors and put together business plans and really just talk that game. And so, I mean, honestly, still to this day, I feel like I'm more of a banker than I am a producer at some points, because you have to really like understand the financial world, and you have to understand how like finance models work and
Mhm.
how everything can be put together to actually make something cohesive. And that is I think that's a scary thing for a lot of people.
Oh yeah, it's before I ended up in a as an executive producer, I actually worked in security sales. So it was it's a very good background for being a producer. The I also sold life insurance, which there's a reason I don't do that anymore. But and it's funny that you call yourself more of a banker, given that your office is literally a former bank.
Yeah, Columbia Bank.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, as we were doing the pre-roll, he actually showed me his vault a little bit, which is kind of cool. Are you actually going to use that for anything, or just
It's our storage room. I put some metal racks in there, so we have, you know, this place serves as like a community art center. So I rent
okay?
it out on the weekends, and mostly weekends. We do have some weekday rentals, but
Mhm.
so we allow artists to come in and do photography shoots, and we have a photography studio in one of the rooms. And but yeah, so I have two metal racks in there that have all of our lighting gear and all of our,
Mhm.
you know, overflow of stuff that we need to have here. So
That makes sense, and I'd
the
imagine it's
vault turned into a storage room.
well. I mean, film equipment is pretty expensive. It's I guess it's good for it to be protected.
Yeah,
Um,
it's not lock. It's not a lockable.
no.
It's definitely not active vault.
Mhm.
So, but it's still cool nonetheless.
That is true. Um, yeah, so you've had at least one film in Sundance. Um, did you just cold submit, or did you work an internal network to get there?
That was definitely relationship based. I think
Mhm.
this entire industry is like who you know and how
Mhm.
you make it happen. So our one of my producing partner on that film, and you know, his family was a big financial backing for the film.
Mhm.
Uh, he knew some folks, he knew the programmers, because he had another film that was at Sundance, and so it helped. You know, it definitely helped. I mean, we were filming well past the submission deadline, so we had to keep at grant getting extensions, and we got in. You know, it was our goal to get into Sundance, and we did. And then after that, we're like, okay, now what? You know, so it was definitely a big learning experience for me. But it opened up a lot of doors to sales companies, distributors who are like, okay, you produce this film, like, you know, yeah, we'll take a meeting with you. So that was helpful, but it was definitely a big learning process.
Yeah, I mean, like, speaking from the sales and distribution side, if you have a top 10 or even a top 5 film festival, you're gonna get extra review at the, sales agency 100% of the time, and Sundance is still top of the heap, um, in terms of just all festivals, not segmented by whatever genre you're actually going for. But, yeah, so that was that the first film you ever had a hand in financing?
Yeah, I didn't finance myself, but I
Mhm.
went out and raised financing for, yeah. That was the
Okay,
first, yeah.
cool. Yeah. So how much of your film do you generally try to get financed in ways that are not equity?
I mean, traditionally speaking, the majority of my films have been uh, all private equity
Mhm,
and a little bit of debt with the tax incentives.
mhm,
Um, But now the models that we're building out, because now we're looking at doing like 15, $20 million movies. Now that obviously has changed drastically. So, we're looking more like that 20 to 30% private equity, and the rest is going to be all debt.
Okay. And I assume debt backed debt with either pre-sales or tax incentives, right?
Correct.
Yeah. For those listening, I have blogs and videos on it, but you never want to take unbacked, unsecured debt. If you can borrow against something like a tax incentive or a pre-sale from a reputable company, that's a great way of financing. That's possibly the best you can find realistically, but the for large money. But yeah, and when we say equity, we just mean from investors. I'll link some of those in the description. You've dealt with a decent number of sales agents. How have you done your diligence on them? How have you looked into them?
Yeah, I mean, that's always hard. I mean, we've had some good relationships with folks, and we've had some bad ones. I mean, I really, really like to focus on boutique sales companies. I feel like they're the ones that are going to be the champions for your films, because they also only have so much bandwidth to take on so many projects. So if they take on your project, it's a meaningful relationship right there. Yeah, I feel like some of the bigger sales companies, you kind of get lost in the shuffle. And if things aren't really going as planned, it's kind of like you get kind of put on the back burner a little bit. So I really try to build relationships with people. So I'm working a lot with some sales reps right now, and it was a matter of meeting with these folks for years before I was like, okay, let's make a movie together. Like anytime I go to LA, it's like, let's go grab dinner. Let's go become friends and kind of understand each other. So that's a process. I think, I think in this industry, you really have to take relationships just so seriously. It's almost like you're dating people. Like you have to take it so seriously. Like investors, I want to make sure that we get the right investors for the project, and we're not just working with like crummy people who are going to take advantage of you, or that are going to be upset if they're not making 150% back on their film, which is very hard to do. So it's just, so with the sales reps, it's kind of just the same like motto for me: building relationships and seeing. You look at people's filmography, like what have they done? Is it similar to the film that you want them to rep? If they did like a film that you really enjoy, like talk to them about that. Like the company that did our sales rep he was our sales rep for Quicksand. They've done so many films, Altitude. So they've done so many great films, and they've repped a lot of films that have gone on to win Academy Awards. And so I liked their approach to things, because they were taking on these prestige dramas, but they're also taking on these low budget indie horror films. And I'm like, okay, that's interesting. It was kind of fun to kind of see that they just like that. They like to be a part of films. And so it's I'm definitely rambling on it, but that's just kind of like the experience that I go into it with.
Yeah, I mean, relationships in this business are absolutely vital. I mean, relationships in any business are important, but in the film industry, it's really unlike other industries I've seen and worked in. You always do kind of need to know somebody and trust somebody, and also talking to an investor is always a bit like dating. That's just true. I've actually had some investors say, I mean, yeah, it was a second date after a meeting with an entrepreneur directly. But it is something that I think takes a while to accept, even if you've been told it, because film school will tell you this, hopefully, but it takes a while for people to actually accept exactly how deep this runs, and sometimes I still have to remind myself of exactly how deep these relationship wells run, basically.
Yeah.
So yeah, what are you working on next?
That's always so hard to answer because it's kind of like, you know, as an independent producer, I feel like I just have a ton of coals in the fire,
Mhm,
and you never know which one's actually going to strike hot, and you just
mhm,
run with that one.
mhm,
We have a pretty big television series. I created a new finance model that for TV that
mhm,
allows private equity to be a part of the television process, which is something that has not really been too successful in the past.
mhm,
And it's something that we're very, very excited about. I can't really go too deep into the relationships that we have, but it's with some of the biggest people in the industry who are helping us make this thing. And it's going to be a very big show. So we're very excited about that. So we have that. We have a yeah, during the pandemic, I was like consuming so much TV that
mhm,
I was, why am I not producing TV? I love TV. I love watching, these that's also where I think that the streaming world has made it so these TV shows are now like, cinematic masterpieces. So I love that world. And so we now have 3 TV shows that we're producing. Obviously, we have kept them under wraps now, especially with all the strikes and that new stuff happening. We're kind of
mhm.
on pause. But we have that, and we have several features that we're also, pushing forward. But right now, I'm focusing my energy towards investor outreach and building those relationships while we're kind of like navigating these strikes.
That makes sense. I mean, the strikes will end
Yeah,
eventually. It's a
and I think that they will end, and I think that they will actually prove once again that independent film is going to be. I think it's going to boost independent filmmaking like significantly. When you have people who are talking about independent film the way that they're as passionately as like Mark Ruffalo, like
mhm,
that is like it's exciting to me that this is where we're kind of going. And that is the best way to show the studios, we're gonna go make our own stuff, and if you want to be a part of it, great, then let's
mhm.
all. So I think independent film is gonna really skyrocket after these strikes.
I hope you're right. I mean, right now it's been for a while it's been a little bit of a bleak time for indie film.
Yeah, I
Especially
think
with
I think
lower
the
budgets.
pandemic did not do anybody any service, but like the theaters just collapsing based off of the fact that now it seems like to me like mostly it's tentpole productions that are doing well at the theaters. I would love to see more independent films dominating the box office, but that would be great to see if that happened out of this whole craziness. But that's also where the consumption of content is changing the playing field too.